Thunder cracks over a wind-swept English coastline. You are walking a lonely path, the sea mist clinging to your clothes, when a shape detaches itself from the gloom. 2 points of fire, like burning coals, fix on you from the darkness. This is the Black Shuck, the ghostly hellhound whose legend has haunted the medieval mind for centuries, and whose mystery still walks among us today. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the startling truth behind one of history's most persistent paranormal tales. We will trace its paw prints from ancient pagan myths to a violent storm that scarred a church door, and ask whether this creature is a demon, a warning, or something buried deep within ourselves. What kind of fear lasts for 500 years? This creature has a name, and that name carries the weight of its terror. Across the lonely heaths and coastal villages of East Anglia, they call it the Black Shuck. Picture a dog, but one born from the shadows themselves. It stands as tall as a calf, a monstrous silhouette of matted, jet black fur, often described as shaggy or ragged, as if it has just emerged from a peat bog or a rain-lashed moor. Its most chilling feature, the one every account agrees upon, are its eyes. They are not the eyes of an animal. They are saucer-sized orbs that burn with an internal fire, sometimes described as hellish red, other times as a sickly, spectral green, cutting through the darkest night or the thickest sea fog. This is not a creature you find by a warm hearth. Its domain is the liminal spaces, the places between worlds where the veil feels thin, the crossroads at midnight, the ancient burial mound, the cliff-top path during a howling gale. The very weather seems to bend to its presence, with many sightings coinciding with sudden, violent storms, as if the atmosphere itself recoils from its passing. The name Black Shuck is a key to its ancient soul. The black is simple enough, a description of its impenetrable hide, but Shuck is where the history whispers. Many scholars trace it directly back to the Old English word scucker, which simply means demon or fiend. This is not a stray hound, it is a being classified by our ancestors as a malevolent spirit, a thing of explicit evil. Other theories point to a more local, descriptive origin, from a regional dialect word like shucky, meaning shaggy or rough-haired. Yet even this mundane explanation takes on a sinister tone when applied to such an unnatural beast. Its shagginess is not of this world. Its behavior is equally dual-natured, a paradox that makes it even more unsettling. Sometimes the Black Shuck is a silent omen. Witnesses report it padding past them on a lonely road, those fiery eyes glancing their way before the beast melts back into the darkness, leaving only a sense of profound dread in its wake. The encounter itself is the warning, and often, a death in the family or a local disaster follows within days. Other times, the omen is not silent but violently direct. Legends tell of the hound attacking churches, its claws scoring deep gouges into oak doors, its spectral form bursting through windows to terrify congregations. In these tales, it is an active force of supernatural fury, a demon set upon holy ground. This core iconography, the giant black dog with burning eyes, an omen of death born from storm and shadow, is the template. It is the seed from which 1,000 local variations grew, and it was this terrifying template that was waiting, fully formed, for one catastrophic day in the 16th century, a day when legend left its permanent, physical mark on history. That terrifying template did not appear from nowhere. To understand the Black Shuck, we must listen for its earliest howls, echoes from a world much older than the medieval church. Long before the name Shuck was whispered in East Anglian lanes, other cultures across northern Europe told tales of supernatural hounds, creatures that guarded the gates between life and death. The Celts spoke of the CW circumflex en anon, the hounds of the otherworld. These were not monsters of pure evil, but spectral white dogs with red ears, companions to the god of the underworld, Aron. Their baying was an omen of death, a beautiful and terrible sound heard on the wind, signaling a soul's passage. Here, the canine is a psychopomp, a guide for the departing, a concept far more ancient and complex than a simple demon. From the Norse sagas comes Garma, the blood-stained hound chained at the entrance to Hell, the realm of the dead. Garma is a guardian, a fearsome sentinel whose breaking free was prophesied to signal the beginning of Ragnarok, the end of all things. And then there is the sweeping, chaotic terror of the wild hunt, a pan-European folklore motif. On stormy nights, a phantom host of huntsmen, often led by a lost king or a god like Odin, would tear across the sky. Their passage was heralded by the baying of ghostly hounds, and to see this procession was considered a death sentence or a portent of great calamity. These myths share a core DNA with our Shuck, the giant black dog, as an omen inextricably linked to death, storms, and the thinning of the veil between worlds. Medieval England sat at a crossroads of these beliefs, a melting pot of Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, and Norse influences. The Black Shuck is not an isolated invention, it is the local adaptation of a primordial fear. The church may have later painted it as a demon, but its roots tap into something much deeper, a universal human instinct to give form to the unknown forces that govern our mortality. This ancient tapestry of belief sets the stage perfectly for the moment the legend became undeniable, for the day the story left myth and carved itself into solid oak. The transition from whispered folklore to written history is a crucial one. It is in the dry, factual pages of medieval chronicles where we find the Black Shuck first taking a form that its contemporaries considered real, documented truth. These were not storybooks but records of kings, wars, and divine signs, meant to be a sober account of the world. And within one of the most important of these, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the beast makes a startling appearance. The entry for the year 1127 is chilling in its matter-of-fact tone. It describes a wild hunt seen by many frightened witnesses across the countryside, a pack of huntsmen riding on black horses and black goats, accompanied by hounds that were, in the chronicler's own words, black and huge and hideous. Their eyes were said to be like saucers, and they glowed in the night. This was not a single traveler's tall tale, it was a mass sighting, an event deemed significant enough to be recorded alongside the political happenings of the year. Think about what this meant for a medieval person reading this chronicle. This account validated the terror. It took the local ghost story and gave it the weight of documented history, placing these supernatural hounds firmly in the real world, witnessed by many upstanding people. The chronicles were the internet of their day, the primary means by which news, both natural and supernatural, spread across the land. An entry like this did not just report a weird event, it cemented the creature's reputation as a genuine portent. The chronicler explicitly links the apparition to a period of great strife and poor harvests, framing it as a divine or demonic warning. This is how the Black Shuck graduated from village legend to a national omen. Its image was no longer just spoken, it was inscribed, giving it a permanence and an authority that oral tales could never achieve. The beast now had a parchment trail, and its next documented appearance would be even more violent, leaving physical scars that you can still see with your own eyes today. That parchment trail leads directly to a specific, storm-racked Sunday in the late 16th century, a day when the legend of the Black Shuck became a matter of public record and physical evidence. The date was August 4, 1577. A tempest of almost biblical fury swept across East Anglia, a storm so violent it was seen as a direct expression of God's wrath. And moving within that wrath, according to terrified witnesses, was the beast itself. Our most detailed account comes from a remarkable source, a contemporary pamphlet published shortly after the event with the chilling title, A Strange and Terrible Wonder. It is within these pages that the Black Shuck steps from folklore into a specific time and place with devastating consequences. The pamphlet describes how, during the height of the storm, a gigantic, hellish black dog suddenly appeared inside Holy Trinity Church in the town of Blithburg. Can you picture the scene? The congregation huddled in prayer as thunder shook the very stones, and then this monstrous creature materializes in their sacred space. It raced through the church, and in its passing, the account states it killed a man and a boy, and left another man shrunken and withered as if blasted by lightning. As it fled the building, it left permanent marks of its passage, deep scorch marks on the north door that are still pointed out today as the devil's fingerprints. But the horror was not confined to Blithburg. The same pamphlet claims the beast traveled the few miles to the market town of Bungay, bursting into St. Mary's Church there. The description is horrifically vivid. It writes that the dog, or the devil in such a likeness, flew upon the people in a most violent fashion, striking them down. The most famous line from the account states the creature wrung the necks of them both, a phrase that evokes a brutal, unnatural strength. 2 parishioners were reportedly killed instantly, and a third was left badly burned. Now we must read this source with an understanding of its context. This pamphlet was not a neutral news report. It was a piece of Puritan propaganda, published during a time of intense religious turmoil in England. The Protestant reformers saw the established church as corrupt and in need of purification. A strange and terrible wonder explicitly frames the hellhound's attack as divine punishment for the town's moral failings and, by extension, the failures of the church hierarchy. The storm and the beast were presented as God's instruments to chasten a sinful population. This context is crucial. It means the account was designed to terrify and to preach, to use a sensational supernatural event to drive a religious and political message. Whether a real dog went mad during a lightning storm, or whether the entire story was a symbolic fabrication, the result was the same. The Black Shuck was now anchored to a real date, real locations, and real, tangible scars on a church door. The legend had been weaponized, and its power grew exponentially because of it. The scorch marks on the north door of Blithburg Church are not just a story, they are a physical destination. Visitors today can still go and see them for themselves, dark, ragged gouges in the ancient oak, pointed out for centuries as the undeniable proof of the Black Shuck's passing. These are the famous devil's claw marks, the tangible scar left by the supernatural fury of that 1577 storm. But what are we actually looking at? The most logical explanation is also the one provided by the storm itself, a direct lightning strike. A bolt hitting the church lead roof or a nearby iron fitting could have sent a surge of searing heat down the metal door hinges or nails, scorching and splintering the wood in a dramatic, linear pattern. To a terrified populace emerging from a tempest that had just brought a hellhound into their sanctuary, these fresh, unexplained burns would not look like an electrical accident. They would look exactly like the claw marks of a gigantic beast, the literal fingerprint of the demon that had just attacked them. This is where the legend truly cemented itself, moving from an event you heard about to an artifact you could touch. In the medieval and early modern mind, the world was a text written by God, and every unusual event, from a comet to a deformed birth, was a sign to be interpreted. A strange mark appearing on a church door after a deadly storm was not a coincidence. It was a divine or demonic message carved into the very fabric of their community. The physical evidence created a feedback loop. The story explained the marks, and the marks, visible to all, validated the story for every new generation. A parent could take a child to the church, run a hand over the rough, blackened grooves, and say, "This is where it happened." The artifact perpetuates the narrative, transforming a possible natural phenomenon into an eternal supernatural truth. It blurs the line completely, asking us even now what matters more, the objective cause of the marks or the immense power of the story they tell. This power of the physical relic is a key to understanding how folklore survives. It roots the ephemeral in the permanent, and as the centuries rolled on, the Black Shuck did not fade away with the medieval world. It adapted, finding new forms and new reasons to haunt the modern imagination just as fiercely as it once haunted those lonely coastal paths. The story of the Black Shuck is not confined to a single church door or stormy night. Its territory is vast, a shadowy map drawn across the whole of eastern England. If you were to chart its sightings, you would create a geography of fear stretching from the lonely salt marshes of the Norfolk coast down through the heaths and fishing villages of Suffolk. This is its ancient heartland, where the North Sea winds howl and the mist rolls in from the water, creating the perfect shifting stage for a spectral hound. But the creature's influence ripples outward, even on the high granite moorlands of Dartmoor in the southwest, famous for its own spectral hound. The legends whisper to one another, variations on a deeply British theme of phantom dogs and omens. What is truly fascinating, however, is not the broad region but the hyper-local precision within it. In the medieval world and long after, almost every parish, every village, seems to have cultivated its own personal shuck. The name itself shifts with the local dialect. You might hear it called Old Shuck, Shucky, or simply the Black Dog. More importantly, each community pins the beast to a specific, tangible location within their own world. There is the lane it is said to patrol, the specific crossroads where it appears at midnight, the old bridge it haunts, or the footpath near a particular farm where it was last seen. This is how a medieval mystery becomes embedded in the very soil. It transforms folklore into a form of living, navigable geography. A traveler in a past century would not just know the legend, they would know to avoid the hollow oak on the Bungay Road after dark, or to hurry past the crumbling wall on the way to the next village. The landscape itself becomes a storybook, with every landmark holding a potential warning or a whispered tale. This localization gave the legend incredible resilience. It was not some distant monster from a chronicle, it was a neighbor, a feature of the local environment as real as the hill or the stream. The fear was mapped, and in being mapped, it became a permanent part of the community's identity, a shared secret written into the paths they walked every day. But the Black Shuck was never truly alone in the dark. Its story is just one chapter in a much older, much larger book of British terror. Across the misty hills and ancient forests of the entire British Isles, other phantom hounds kept their own grim watch, each a local reflection of the same primal fear. To the north, in the rugged valleys of Yorkshire, people dreaded the Barghest. This creature shared the shuck's monstrous size and shaggy black form, but its folklore added a gruesome detail, the clanking of chains as it moved, a sound that spoke of imprisonment and eternal punishment. It was a specific omen, appearing only to foretell a death in the family who saw it. Further north still, in Lancashire and Northumbria, the threat was the Jitrash. This spirit was more shapeshifter than pure hound, often taking the form of a large black dog, but sometimes appearing as a horse or even a mist. Its behavior was similarly ambiguous, sometimes leading lost travelers to safety, other times luring them to their doom in bogs. This duality reminds us that the ancient worldview was not simply good versus evil, but a complex landscape of capricious forces. Across the sea in Wales, the mythology returns to a more solemn, ancient purpose with the CW circumflex en anon, the hounds of the other world. These were spectral, white-bodied hounds with red ears, hunting not for souls to torment, but as companions to Aron, ruler of Anon, the Welsh afterlife. Their baying was a beautiful, chilling sound on the wind, a signal that the veil between worlds was thin and that death was near. And on the Isle of Man, in the shadowy corridors of Peel Castle, the Mordd Dwg, a large, shaggy black spaniel, was said to patrol. Its presence was so accepted that the guards would refuse to do the night watch alone, leaving a companion in the guardroom before braving the passage it haunted. What ties all these beings together, from the demonic Shuck to the psychopomp CW circumflex en anon, is their fundamental role as an omen. They are all manifestations of a deep-seated human need to give a face, a form, and a set of rules to the unknowable approach of death. The Black Shuck, with its burning eyes and church-scarring fury, is simply the East Anglian dialect of this pan-Celtic and Anglo-Saxon language of dread. It shows us that medieval fears were not isolated, but a shared cultural fabric, woven from local landscapes and ancient beliefs into a tapestry of warning that covered the entire land. This network of legends raises a profound question. If so many people in so many different places independently reported seeing such similar creatures, what were they truly witnessing? The answer may lie not in the supernatural, but in the very human mind and in the strange, flickering lights of the landscape itself. The transformation of the Black Shuck from a folkloric omen to a Puritan hellhound is one of the most dramatic shifts in its long history. To understand this change, we must step into the turbulent world of the 16th and 17th centuries, a time when the Protestant Reformation was tearing at the very fabric of English society. For the Puritans, a zealous reform movement within the Church of England, the medieval worldview was not just outdated, it was dangerously corrupt. The old ways, with their belief in fairies, neutral spirits, and capricious entities like the Jitrash, were seen as pagan superstitions, a spiritual fog that obscured the stark, biblical reality of a cosmic war between God and Satan. In this new, uncompromising theology, the supernatural was stripped of its ambiguity. An apparition was never a mystery, it was a message. It was either a divine angel or, far more likely, a demonic fiend. There was no middle ground, no room for the ancient, complex spirits that once populated the landscape. This is the crucial lens through which we must re-examine that infamous pamphlet from Bungay. The violent storm of 1577 was not a random act of nature, and the black dog was not a local ghost. The pamphlet, titled A Strange and Terrible Wonder, frames the entire event with a specific, terrifying purpose. The Black Shuck is explicitly described as the devil in such a likeness. It is no longer a creature of folklore, it is a literal demon, a hellhound unleashed from the pits of hell itself and sent as a direct instrument of God's wrath. Why would God use a demon? In Puritan thought, this was a form of divine punishment, a chastisement meant to shock a sinful population into repentance. The pamphlet meticulously lists the town's moral failures, from Sabbath breaking to general wickedness, presenting the hellhound's attack as the direct, deserved consequence. This reinterpretation served a powerful dual purpose. First, it weaponized the local legend for evangelism, using a familiar terror to drive home a new, stricter religious doctrine. The message was clear: abandon the old, sinful ways or face the literal hounds of hell. Second, it was a potent piece of political propaganda against the established church, which the Puritans viewed as insufficiently reformed. The attack on a physical church building, scarring its very doors, was a powerful symbol that the institution itself was under judgment. So the creature that once might have been a mysterious guardian of the crossroads or a psychopomp from an older faith was forcibly baptized in the fires of Puritan ideology. It became a simplified yet far more sinister symbol of pure evil. This theological rebranding did not just change the story, it amplified its fear factor for generations, cementing the image of the Black Shuck as a demonic entity in the popular imagination. But this raises a haunting possibility. If the terror could be so powerfully shaped by belief, what other forces, perhaps within the human mind itself, could conjure such a persistent vision? Yet the demon of the Puritans could not remain a purely theological terror forever. As the 17th century gave way to the 18th and 19th, a new force began to reshape the legend: the rise of cheap, mass-produced print. The Black Shuck was about to become a celebrity. Its journey from pulpit warning to popular entertainment began with the humble broadside. These were single sheets of paper, crudely printed and sold for a penny on street corners, the tabloid newspapers of their day. They thrived on sensation, and what could be more sensational than a fresh encounter with the hellhound of East Anglia? A farmer's terrifying midnight walk, a coachman's sighting on a lonely road. These personal accounts were now captured in ink and distributed by the thousand. The broadside writers were not interested in theological debate or verifying facts. Their goal was to sell copies, and they knew fear sold. So the stories became more dramatic, the descriptions more lurid. The creature's eyes burned brighter, its size grew larger, its attacks more violent. The localized, specific omen was repackaged as a thrilling, repeatable spectacle for a national audience. This was a crucial shift. The Black Shuck was no longer just a story you heard from your grandparents about a specific lane. It was a story you could buy, a piece of merchandise that brought the chills of the countryside into the bustling, gas-lit streets of London. The terror became a product, and the product was in high demand. This appetite for printed scares only grew in the Victorian era with the explosion of the penny dreadful. These cheap, serialized booklets, often just 8 pages long, were devoured by a newly literate working class hungry for adventure and horror. While we do not have a specific titled penny dreadful called The Adventures of Black Shuck, the tropes were everywhere. Spectral hounds, cursed families, and haunted moors were standard fare. The archetype of the giant black dog as an omen of death was now a reliable stock character in the Gothic toolkit, a familiar monster ready to be inserted into any story set on a stormy heath. This transition from folk belief to mass-market horror changed the creature's fundamental nature. Its power was no longer rooted in a specific community's shared fear of a real place. Instead, its power came from its ability to evoke a generic, enjoyable fear in the comfort of one's own home. The legend was sanitized just enough to be thrilling rather than truly threatening. The beast that once signaled personal doom was now a source of shivery entertainment, a testament to how the human need for a good ghost story can reshape even the darkest omen into a form of popular culture. And as the world marched into the 20th century, this cultural version of the Shuck would find itself facing a new kind of scrutiny, one that sought to explain the legend not with demons but with science and psychology. Yet the fires of the Enlightenment, which sought to banish superstition with the light of reason, did not extinguish the sightings of the Black Shuck. In fact, the 18th and 19th centuries produced some of the most detailed and curiously credible encounters on record. This was an age of turnpike roads and mail coaches, where more people were traveling after dark than ever before, and with them traveled the stories. Consider the terrified coachman driving his team across a moonlit common, only to have a gigantic, silent black dog materialize beside the horses and keep pace with the vehicle for miles before vanishing into a hedgerow. Or the solitary traveler on foot, feeling the prickling sensation of being watched, turning to see those 2 luminous orbs fixed upon him from a distance, the beast following steadily but never closing the final gap. These are not tales from shadowy medieval chronicles, but from the age of newspapers and empirical observation. What gave these accounts their peculiar power was the character of the witnesses. They were no longer just frightened peasants. Reports now came from country doctors returning from a late call, respected clergymen walking between parishes, and even military officers. These were educated men, individuals trusted in their communities and presumed to be of sound mind and sober habit. Their testimony carried a new kind of weight. A ghost story from a villager could be dismissed as superstition, but an account from the local vicar, a man of God and learning, demanded a different kind of attention. It forced a rational age to confront an irrational phenomenon. The legend was adapting, finding a new foothold not in the fear of hellfire, but in the growing Gothic dread of the unknown that lurked just beyond the edge of the civilized world. This was the era of novels filled with ancient curses and haunted landscapes, where the thrill of the supernatural became a popular entertainment. The fear the Shuck evoked shifted subtly. It was less about divine punishment for sin, and more about the unsettling idea that the modern, ordered world still had pockets of primordial mystery that science could not yet illuminate. The beast became a symbol of all the things the age of reason could not explain, a persistent phantom in an age that claimed to have banished phantoms. This enduring mystery, witnessed by seemingly reliable people, inevitably led to a new kind of inquiry. If the creature was not a demon and not merely a story, then what was it? The search for an answer would push investigators to look not to theology or folklore, but to the human mind and the very landscape itself. That persistent phantom of the rational age found its perfect new home not on the lonely heath but on the printed page. As the Victorian era embraced the thrilling chill of Gothic horror, authors began to raid the rich storehouse of British folklore, and the Black Shuck archetype was a prime specimen for literary taxidermy. The most famous and direct transplantation is, of course, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's masterpiece, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Though set on the misty moors of Dartmoor, the creature at its heart is a direct descendant of our East Anglian terror. Doyle transplants the entire folkloric template, a gigantic, phosphorescent hound, a family curse, and a landscape so ancient and brooding it seems to generate supernatural evil from its very soil. Sherlock Holmes, the ultimate emblem of Victorian rationality, is pitted against a legend that feels utterly real to those who believe it. Doyle did not invent the phantom hound of Dartmoor. Local legends there spoke of a spectral black dog long before he wrote. But his genius was in synthesizing that local tale with the broader, more terrifying archetype of the Shuck, then framing it within a detective story, a genre built on logic. This created a powerful tension, the modern mind grappling with a medieval monster, and in doing so, he cemented the image of the hellhound in the global imagination far more powerfully than any broadside ever could. But Doyle was not working in isolation. The monstrous canine as an agent of primal fear was a staple of the Gothic toolkit. Bram Stoker, in Dracula, uses wolves and large dogs not as spectral omens, but as literal extensions of the Count's malevolent will. The wolf that breaks into Lucy's bedroom is a creature of savage, controlled violence, a familiar animal transformed into a tool of the supernatural. This idea of the dog as a servant to a greater evil taps into a different but equally ancient strand of fear, the betrayal of a loyal companion. Other writers of the period used the archetype to explore psychological terror. The black dog could symbolize a family's hidden guilt, a hereditary madness, or the crushing weight of the past, themes the Victorians were obsessed with. By absorbing these folkloric elements, authors performed a crucial act of preservation and transformation. They stripped the legend of its specific local geography and Puritan moralizing and refashioned it into a versatile symbol. The hellhound was no longer just a sign of personal death. It became a metaphor for inherited sin, for the savage past that refuses to stay buried, for the animalistic instinct civilization tries to suppress. This literary adoption did not kill the folk legend, it gave it a second life. Readers who shuddered at the description of the Baskerville hound might then hear a local tale of a black dog on a nearby common with a new, deeper sense of dread. The page validated the pasture, creating a feedback loop where fiction reinforced belief. The creature that began as a peasant's omen had now been curated into the library of modern horror, its eyes glowing just as brightly in the mind of a reader by a gas lamp as they ever did in a stormy churchyard. And as the world moved beyond gaslight, this literary monster was ready for its next evolution, waiting for the flicker of the silver screen to bring it to terrifying life. The literary hellhound, now immortalized in libraries, never truly left the lonely roads it once haunted. Its howls echo not just from the pages of Victorian novels, but from the pages of 20th century local newspapers and the digital forums of today. The legend of the Black Shuck is not a relic, it is a living, breathing mystery with sightings reported right up to the present moment. Consider the motorist driving a desolate East Anglian road on a foggy night in the 1960s. Their headlights cut through the gloom, only to illuminate a massive, shaggy black form standing motionless in the center of the lane. Before they can brake, the creature simply vanishes, leaving nothing but a racing heart and a story for the local paper. Or picture the dog walker on a coastal path at dusk in the 1980s, their own pet suddenly freezing, hackles raised, staring into a thicket. From the shadows, two luminous green orbs stare back, belonging to a dog far larger than any breed they recognize. It watches in utter silence before melting away into the gathering dark. These are not curated tales from centuries past. They are modern anecdotes often reported by people with no prior knowledge of the folklore, individuals who simply experienced something they could not explain. The settings have evolved with the times. The phantom now appears in the glare of car headlights on a country bypass, or is glimpsed from the window of a late-night train crossing the marshes. Night security guards patrolling industrial estates on the edge of town have reported a large, dark canine shadowing them just beyond the perimeter fence, a silent sentinel that is never there when they turn their torch beam directly toward it. The consistency across these decades of reports is what chills the blood. Whether the witness is a farmer in 1942 or a hiker in 2022, the description remains locked in a specific pattern. A dog, but unnaturally large, often compared to a calf or a small bear. Its fur is black, sometimes matted or shaggy. Its eyes are not mere reflections, they are described as glowing from within, like lanterns or burning coals. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it moves or stands in an eerie, profound silence. No panting, no growl, no sound of paws on gravel. This continuity is the core of the enduring puzzle. If the Black Shuck were merely a story, you would expect the descriptions to morph with the times, to gain robotic features or adapt to new urban myths. But they do not. The image has remained stubbornly, eerily consistent for over 500 years. This presents us with two fascinating possibilities. The first is that we are dealing with a phenomenally persistent cultural meme. A ghost story so perfectly crafted that it subconsciously primes people to interpret strange canines in a certain terrifying way. The second, more intriguing possibility is that this consistency points toward a shared experience of something real, a phenomenon that our modern world has yet to fully define or understand. The mystery, it seems, is far from finished with us. That stubborn consistency in the sightings forces a rational mind to ask a very simple question. Could the Black Shuck be something entirely ordinary, a creature of flesh and blood, simply seen through a lens of primal fear? The most straightforward explanation is misidentification. Picture a large, shaggy-coated dog, perhaps a lost Newfoundland or a Mastiff breed, roaming the lonely heaths after dark. To a traveler already nervous on a desolate path, the sudden appearance of any large canine would be startling. In the flicker of a lantern or the thick, distorting sea fog, its size could be exaggerated, its eyes catching the light in an unnatural, fiery gleam. This theory gains weight when we remember that for much of England's history, domestic dogs were working animals, often left to roam and far less standardized than our pets today. A genuinely massive, poorly kept stray could easily become the stuff of local legend. But could it be something wilder? Though wolves were hunted to extinction in England by the late medieval period, the memory of them lived on in folk tales and collective fear. The last wolf in Britain was killed in Scotland in the 1700s, but for centuries before that, the wolf was a real and present danger, a creature of the deep woods that threatened livestock and, in stories, people. The silhouette of a large wolf in poor light could absolutely match the description of the Shuck. Even more exotic possibilities exist. Medieval and early modern England had traveling menageries, collections of exotic animals that were sometimes poorly secured. An escaped black bear, though incredibly rare, would be a creature of truly monstrous proportions to an English peasant who had never seen one. A bear on its hind legs with small, shining eyes could forge a memory so terrifying it would be passed down for generations as a demon hound. The key ingredient in all these scenarios is not the animal itself, but the conditions of the sighting and the psychology of the witness. Fear is a powerful hallucinogen. When you are alone in the dark, every rustle in the hedgerow is a threat, every shadow moves. The mind, wired for survival, fills in the blanks with the worst possible interpretation. A distant cow becomes a monster, a badger darting across the path transforms into a fleeing imp. In the thick, swirling fog of the Norfolk coast, an ordinary dog at 50 paces becomes a shifting, amorphous giant with eyes that glow from within its own personal mist. This trick of perception is universal. It is why we see faces in clouds or shapes in the shadows of a dim room. Our pattern-seeking brains, especially when afraid, are desperate to make sense of the unknown, and they often default to the most culturally available template for terror. For someone in medieval East Anglia, that template was not a bear or a wolf. It was the skucker, the demon dog already etched into their worldview by story and sermon. The animal provided the form, but the human mind, steeped in folklore and fear, provided the hellish context. Yet there is another layer to this mystery, one that involves not living creatures, but the very atmosphere itself, where the storm does not just hide the beast but becomes it. But our search for rational explanations cannot stop at misidentified animals. To truly understand the Black Shuck, we must look inward into the very architecture of the human mind. Our brains are not passive cameras recording reality. They are active interpreters, constantly stitching together sensory data to create a coherent world. This beautiful, flawed system gives us two powerful keys to the legend. The first is a phenomenon called pareidolia, our brain's compulsive tendency to find familiar patterns in random stimuli. We see the face of a man in the moon, a castle in a cloud, and yes, a monstrous hound in a tangle of dark branches on a windy night. On a lonely path with only the moon for light, the shifting shadows of a wind-bent thorn bush can coalesce into a low, crouching shape. The glint of distant dew on two spiderwebs can become those infamous burning eyes. The mind, especially one already primed by local tales of a hellhound, completes the picture with terrifying efficiency, transforming an ambiguous, random scene into a clear and present supernatural threat. This effect is supercharged by the second key, the immense power of suggestion. If you're walking down a lane everyone in the village calls Shuck's Lane, your mind is already on high alert. Every rustle, every odd sound is filtered through that expectation. The creak of a tree becomes a growl, the call of a night bird becomes a spectral whine. The folklore itself creates the conditions for its own confirmation, turning a simple evening walk into a potential encounter with the legendary beast. This is not a sign of weakness or foolishness, it is a fundamental feature of human perception. We see what we are prepared to see, and for centuries the people of East Anglia were prepared to see the Black Shuck. This psychological framework served a profound and practical social purpose. Beyond just explaining strange sights and sounds, the legend functioned as a vital piece of community software. In a world without safety railings or public lighting, how do you keep children from playing near the treacherous cliffs that crumbled into the North Sea? You tell them the Black Shuck guards that place. How do you warn people away from the bottomless, sucking mud of the coastal marshes after dark? You say the beast hunts there. The curfew wasn't just a parental rule, it was a supernatural law enforced by a creature with burning eyes. In this light, the Shuck transforms from a mere monster into a folkloric guardian, a narrative fence erected around real physical dangers. It patrolled the boundaries of the safe and the known, its legend a stark, memorable deterrent that was far more effective than a simple "keep out" sign could ever be. This protective function extended into a deeper, more heartbreaking form of explanation. Life in the medieval and early modern period was brutally unpredictable. A healthy man could be struck down in a field by a sudden lightning bolt. A loved one might die in the night from what we would now recognize as a heart attack or stroke with no visible cause. The human need for reason, for a story to make sense of chaos, is overwhelming. A random, senseless tragedy is almost impossible to accept. The appearance of the Black Shuck provided that story. It offered a cause, a tangible agent for the inexplicable. The narrative would say that the man who died of a seizure on the Heath had seen the hound the week before, or that the lightning that struck the church was the beast's fiery breath. The legend became a coping mechanism, a way for a community to weave a terrifying but coherent narrative around events that otherwise seemed like the cruel, random whims of an indifferent universe. It gave a face, a form, and even a malevolent intention to misfortune, which in a strange way can be easier to process than pure chance. So the creature served a dual role. It was both the warden of physical space and the explanation for tragic fate. Yet, even this deeply human analysis cannot account for every thread of the mystery, for there are encounters that seem to involve not just the mind, but something tangible in the very air, a phenomenon where the environment itself appears to conjure the apparition. Perhaps the most haunting resonance of the Black Shuck legend is not found in any church record, but in the quiet, private language of human suffering. The image of a silent, looming black dog has transcended its folkloric roots to become one of the most enduring metaphors for depression in the modern world. This connection was given its most famous voice by Winston Churchill, who referred to his own bouts of profound melancholy as the black dog. He described it as a creature that would follow him, a persistent, shadowy companion whose presence meant days of bleakness and despair from which he could not shake free. The metaphor is chillingly perfect. Depression is not a dramatic monster that attacks from the front. It is often a silent, patient presence. It pads along behind you, a weight at your heels. Its eyes are not fiery, but hollow, draining color and joy from the world. It lies in wait in familiar rooms, turning comfort into confinement. Like the folkloric Shuck, it is an inescapable companion on lonely walks, and its arrival often feels as arbitrary and ominous as a spectral omen. This symbolic layer adds a profound, unexpected depth to the medieval legend. It suggests that the Black Shuck resonated so powerfully across centuries not merely because people were afraid of the dark, but because the creature gave a tangible, external form to an internal, indescribable state. The medieval mind, without our clinical vocabulary for mental anguish, might have interpreted the crushing weight of melancholia as a literal, supernatural visitation. That feeling of being stalked by a nameless dread, of a shadow that dims the sun on a clear day, could easily be personified as a beast with glowing eyes at the edge of your vision. The folklore provided a vessel for the experience. In this light, every tale of the Shuck as a silent follower, a creature that does not always attack but simply watches and instills a deep, existential fear, reads like a poignant attempt to articulate a psychological truth. The legend becomes a shared language for private pain, a way of saying, I too have been followed by the black dog without ever having to name the unnameable. This transforms the Shuck from a simple monster of the marshes into something far more universal. It is a mirror held up to a fundamental human struggle, a medieval attempt to map the terrifying geography of the inner self. And if our inner landscapes can conjure such persistent phantoms, what might the outer landscape, the very earth and sky, be capable of manifesting on its own? The landscape itself may have offered up the bones of giants, fueling the legend long before any living witness took to the roads. A fascinating and speculative theory suggests the Black Shuck could have a fossil origin, a folk memory of creatures that vanished millennia before the first medieval church was built. Imagine a farmer in the 1300s plowing a field near the fens, his blade striking not a stone, but a massive, unfamiliar skull twice the size of a wolf's. What would he make of those huge, empty eye sockets and the long, curved canines? Without any concept of extinction or deep time, his mind would search for a framework to explain this impossible beast. The most logical conclusion, drawn from the world he knew, would be that this was the skull of a monstrous hound, a creature from a bygone age of legends. This process is sometimes called folk paleontology, where the physical remains of prehistoric animals are interpreted through a contemporary mythological lens. Across Europe, the enormous bones of mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses were often claimed as proof of dragons or giants. In England, the discovery of a cave bear skull, with its broad, powerful shape and prominent teeth, could easily be mistaken for a canine of unimaginable proportions. Even more striking is the Irish elk, an extinct deer with antlers spanning over 10 feet. A peasant finding a single, massive antler in a peat bog might interpret it as a single, twisted horn from a demonic beast, its size speaking of a monster that could still be lurking in the deep woods. This theory does not explain the glowing eyes or the spectral behavior of the shuck, but it offers a compelling potential origin for the core idea of a giant, predatory black dog. It provides a tangible seed. The unearthed skull becomes a relic, a physical proof shown to the community, saying, "Look, this creature was real, and if it lived once, it could still walk among us." The story grows around the artifact, giving the legend a history, a pedigree stretching back into a vague, heroic past. It transforms the shuck from a fleeting ghost into a creature with a lineage, a beast whose ancestors left their bones in the very soil the villagers farmed. This connection to the land is profound. It roots the monster not just in specific haunted lanes, but in the geology of the region itself, making the fear as old as the hills. Every plowed field and eroded riverbank held the potential to yield another piece of the puzzle, another bone to validate the old tales. So the legend may have been fed from two directions, by the frightened minds of travelers on dark nights, and by the very earth offering up the remains of ancient titans, waiting for a story to give them new life. The fossil skull offers a tangible beginning, but what if the creature itself is not of this earth at all? Modern paranormal investigators, armed with electromagnetic field meters and digital recorders, often approach the Black Shuck not as a misidentified animal, but as a genuine supernatural entity, and their interpretations span a fascinating spectrum. The most traditional view casts the beast as a ghost. This could be the earthbound spirit of a person who met a violent end, their rage and sorrow coalescing into the form of a monstrous hound to haunt the place of their demise. Or perhaps it is the ghost of an animal itself, a loyal hunting dog so mistreated or so bonded to its master that it refuses to leave the landscape they shared. This spectral explanation fits the pattern of a repetitive, location-specific apparition, a recording of trauma played back on a loop through the centuries. Then there is the demonic interpretation, a theory that has never truly faded since the Puritans first proclaimed it. For those who subscribe to this view, the Black Shuck is a malevolent intelligence, a deceiver that takes the form of a dog to inspire fear and spread despair. Its attacks on churches are not random but targeted assaults on symbols of holiness, and its role as an omen of death is a cruel game, a demonstration of its foreknowledge and power. This idea gives the creature a chilling agency and purpose beyond a mere haunting. But the toolbox of modern paranormal thought offers even stranger possibilities. Some researchers draw from Tibetan mysticism and the concept of the tulpa, a thought form given life and substance by intense collective belief. Could the Black Shuck be a tulpa? For hundreds of years, the people of East Anglia have feared it, described it, and expected to see it. That potent, focused psychic energy, the theory suggests, might have actually sculpted something into existence, a phantom born not from a single death, but from the shared dread of an entire culture. It is a monster made real by the stories told to keep it away. Others look to older traditions of elemental spirits. In this reading, the shuck is not a ghost of a person or a dog, but a raw, conscious force of the landscape itself, a guardian spirit of the marshes and cliffs that manifests as a hound. Its appearances during storms would make perfect sense, as it is an expression of the wild, untamed energy of the place. The most scientifically speculative theory comes from Fortean philosophy, named after researcher Charles Fort, who catalogued anomalous phenomena. This perspective wonders if the Black Shuck is an extra-dimensional entity, Imagine our reality as a sheet of paper and other realities as sheets lying very close to it. Sometimes the theory goes the boundaries between these sheets thin or tear, and something from the other side bleeds through. The creature's sudden appearances and disappearances, its unnatural silence, and its glowing, non-reflective eyes could be signs of something not fully anchored in our physical laws, a visitor from an adjacent world that we can only perceive in brief, terrifying glimpses. What all these interpretations share, from the ghost to the dimensional traveler, is a profound human need. They are attempts to categorize the uncategorizable, to fit the square peg of the shuck into a round hole of understanding, even if that hole is supernatural. They represent our enduring refusal to dismiss the mystery, a collective insistence that some shadows are too deep, too persistent, to be explained away by mist and fear alone. This very refusal forces us to confront the most unsettling possibility of all, that the truth might be something we are not yet equipped to comprehend. From the quiet agony of depression to the roar of an electric guitar, the Black Shuck has made the leap into modern mythology with undeniable force. Its name and image have been fully absorbed into the toolkit of contemporary storytelling, becoming a shorthand for Gothic horror across every medium. In the world of music, the legendary rock band The Darkness, hailing from the creature's own East Anglian heartland, immortalized it in their high-energy track, Black Shuck. The song transforms the medieval terror into a driving rock anthem, its lyrics painting the beast as a chaotic, unstoppable force crashing through a church service, a direct and joyous nod to the Bungay legend. This isn't just a song about a ghost story, it's a cultural reclamation, taking a local folk monster and launching it onto the global stage with a power chord. The creature's influence slinks through the corridors of cinema, especially in the subgenre of hellhound horror. While not always named directly, the archetype is unmistakable. Think of the ominous, mysterious dogs that serve as familiars in films like The Omen, their silent presence signaling a demonic threat far greater than themselves. The very title, The Ghost and the Darkness, though based on true events about lions, taps into that primal fear of a predatory, supernatural beast lurking just beyond the firelight. Modern horror films and series constantly draw from this well, using the image of a large, black, often silent dog with glowing eyes as an instant visual cue that something is deeply wrong with the world, a tradition built directly upon 500 years of folklore. This legacy finds a natural home in the realms of interactive fantasy. In tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, the Black Shuck appears as a named monster, a spectral hound often found in misty marshes or cursed graveyards, ready to challenge adventurers with its fear-inducing gaze. The World of Darkness games, with their focus on modern Gothic horror, feature similar hellhounds as servants of darker powers or as manifestations of rage and despair. Video games, from dark fantasy adventures to survival horror titles, use the creature or its clear derivatives as enemies or atmospheric set pieces. A player exploring a foggy digital forest and encountering a pair of glowing red eyes in the shadows is experiencing a direct lineage from those medieval travelers on the Suffolk coast. In these games, the Shuck is no longer just a story you hear. It is a danger you must actively confront, its rules and abilities codified into game mechanics. This widespread adoption proves something profound about the legend's power. The Black Shuck has transcended its origin. It is no longer solely a folk omen from a specific English region. It is a modular unit of fear, a recognizable symbol that creators can plug into any narrative needing a dose of ancient animalistic dread. Its name alone now carries a payload of expectation, conjuring storms, lonely roads, and a deathly silence broken only by the sound of your own heart. The medieval mystery has been successfully translated, its essence preserved even as its form adapts to rock songs, pixelated screens, and cinematic jump scares. Yet this very process of translation raises a final, haunting question. As the legend becomes a global commodity, what happens to the original, localized fear that gave it birth? Does the story gain immortality in popular culture, even as the specific, whispered warnings on those country lanes begin to fade? The very lanes and pubs of East Anglia now bear the name of their most infamous resident. Walk through a coastal village and you might well find yourself stopping for a pint at the Black Shuck Inn, or passing a gallery window displaying a striking painting of the beast with its fiery eyes. This is not an accident, it is a conscious embrace. The communities that once trembled at the legend have now woven it into the very fabric of their local identity, transforming a medieval terror into a modern cultural landmark. The fear has been curated, becoming a unique point of pride. You can follow dedicated tourist trails that trace the Shuck's path from Bungay to Blithburg, walking in the spectral paw prints while learning the history of the towns themselves. Annual festivals and ghost walks during the darker months invite visitors to step into the story, to feel a shiver of that old dread in a safe, communal setting. Local artists, writers, and brewers continually reinterpret the creature, from dramatic sculptures to specially crafted ales bearing its name. This commercial and cultural adoption reveals a fascinating duality. The Black Shuck is still a scary story told in whispers, but it is also a beloved local character, a mascot born from the mist. This shift is crucial for the legend's survival. By integrating the beast into the local economy and community celebrations, the story is passed on not merely as a warning, but as a vital piece of regional heritage. Parents now share the tale with their children, not just to keep them from the cliffs, but to connect them to the history of their home. The mystery becomes a shared heirloom. This process ensures the Black Shuck remains relevant, its name spoken daily not in fear but in conversation, on signage and in promotional brochures. The phantom that once heralded death now supports local life, drawing visitors whose curiosity fuels the preservation of the very landscape it haunts. The medieval omen has found a 21st century occupation, and in doing so, its story is guaranteed to echo for generations to come. But this embrace leads us to a final, profound reflection. What does the enduring life of this legend truly tell us about ourselves, and about the timeless human need to give shape to the shadows that walk beside us? Could a flesh and blood creature, not a phantom, be the source of the legend? The cryptozoological angle offers a tantalizing possibility that the Black Shuck is an unknown animal, a biological mystery hiding in plain sight. This theory asks us to consider a relict population, a holdover from an earlier age, perhaps a unique subspecies of wolf, smaller and more secretive than its continental cousins, managed to survive England's eradication campaigns by becoming a master of stealth in the remaining patches of wilderness. Or maybe it is a giant feral dog lineage, a throwback to the massive prehistoric canids that once roamed Europe, their genetics persisting in isolated pockets. The idea is compelling because it provides a tangible answer, a creature you could theoretically track, photograph, or even encounter without invoking the supernatural. It transforms the mystery from a ghost story into a zoological puzzle, appealing directly to our desire for concrete discovery. Yet, when we hold this theory up to the harsh light of modern England's landscape, serious cracks appear. This is one of the most densely populated and meticulously surveyed countries on Earth. Its remaining wild spaces, while beautiful, are fragmented and heavily traversed by hikers, naturalists, and gamekeepers. For a breeding population of large predators to remain completely undetected for centuries, leaving no verifiable evidence, strains credulity. Where are the bodies? A creature that lives and dies would eventually leave bones, a carcass by a roadside, or remains found by a farmer. Where is the consistent physical evidence like distinctive scat, tufts of fur caught on fences, or clear, uncontested photographs from trail cameras? The complete absence of this kind of hard proof is the theory's greatest weakness. Furthermore, the ecological pressure would be immense. Such an animal would need a substantial territory and a steady prey base, likely consisting of deer or livestock. Unexplained predation on sheep or calves would be immediately investigated, and any unusual tooth marks or kill patterns would be flagged by authorities. While occasional reports of mysterious livestock deaths do surface, they are exceptionally rare and never conclusively point to an unknown canine. The logistical challenge of concealment is simply too great. So why does this biological explanation persist with such stubborn appeal? Because it represents a bridge between the old world and the new. It allows us to keep the thrill of the monster hunt, the romance of a hidden wilderness, while staying firmly within the realm of science and reason. It is a solution that demands exploration and fieldwork, not seances or psychological analysis. The cryptozoological shuck is a creature of hope for the undiscovered, a testament to the idea that even in our mapped and monitored world, there might still be one last great secret padding through the night. This desire for a tangible beast, however, inevitably circles back to the very human elements that no camera can ever capture, the stories we tell when the evidence remains just out of frame. Yet this local terror is far from unique. The phantom dog with burning eyes is a citizen of the world, a global archetype that appears in countless cultures, each version wearing the mask of its own landscape. In the shadowy folklore of Catalonia, they speak of the dip, a vampiric hellhound said to be the servant of the devil. It is often depicted as a black, emaciated dog, and its sole purpose is to drink the blood of sinners, particularly those who have failed in their religious duties. Its name even comes from a word for thirst. Here, the canine omen is not just a sign of death, but an active agent of divine punishment, a direct parallel to the Puritan interpretation of the shuck. Travel north to Scandinavia and England's own north, and you find the Church Grim. This entity is more complex, a guardian spirit rather than a simple monster. Tradition held that the first creature buried in a new churchyard, often a dog, would become its eternal protector. This grim would appear as a spectral black dog, patrolling the grounds to ward off thieves, vandals, and darker spirits. It was an omen too, but its appearance usually signaled an impending funeral, as if it were preparing to escort a new soul. This transforms the dog from a symbol of fear into one of solemn duty, a psychopomp tied to sacred ground. Across the Atlantic, the legend took root in the rocky soil of New England. Settlers from East Anglia quite literally brought the Black Shuck with them in their stories. In ports like Newburyport and along the dark roads of rural Massachusetts, sightings of a large, silent black dog persisted for centuries, often linked to old burial grounds or the sites of tragic accidents. The archetype had successfully immigrated, proving the story itself was a hardy, portable kind of fear. Further south, in the deserts and mesas of the American Southwest, Pueblo and Navajo traditions speak of spectral canines as well, often as messengers or guardians of the spirit world. While distinct in cultural context, the underlying thread of a dog existing between worlds remains. Perhaps the most evocative English cousin is the Heath hound of Devon and Somerset. This creature is the sound of fear itself. Described as a headless ghost dog, it is rarely seen but often heard, its mournful baying echoing through the woods at night. Its name may come from an old word for howling, and it is said to be the restless soul of an unbaptized child, forever wandering and wailing. This shifts the terror from a visual spectacle to an auditory haunting, a reminder that the omen can come as a sound in the dark, just as chilling as any pair of glowing eyes. From the vampiric dip to the guardian Church Grim, the imported black dog of America to the howling Heath hound, the pattern is undeniable. A ghostly canine as an omen of death or a guardian of thresholds is a global phenomenon. This universalism tells us something profound. The Black Shuck is not merely an East Anglian ghost story. It is a local dialect in a worldwide language of dread. The archetype taps into something primal in the human relationship with dogs themselves. For millennia, dogs have been our closest companions, protectors of our homes and guides on our hunts. But this ancient partnership has a shadow side. In their loyalty, we see fidelity, but in their wildness, we remember the wolf. In their protective bark, we feel safety, but in a sudden growl, we feel threat. The phantom dog embodies this deep ambivalence, representing both a faithful guardian of the afterlife and a terrifying herald of our own mortality. It is the ultimate boundary creature, standing between the home and the wild, the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen. Every culture that has lived alongside dogs seems to have dreamed this shadow companion into being. The Black Shuck, then, is simply England's expression of a timeless human conversation with the dark, a conversation held in the language of our oldest friend. The universal language of the phantom hound speaks to something deep within us, but can that something ever be measured? In our age of data and discovery, the legend of the Black Shuck has not escaped the scrutinizing gaze of modern science, or at least its methods. This ancient mystery now finds itself in the crosshairs of empirical inquiry, a fascinating collision between intangible tradition and the relentless human drive for proof. Paranormal investigation groups, armed with tools more suited to a physics lab than a foggy marsh, regularly descend upon the reported hotspots of East Anglia. They sweep the lonely lanes around Bungay with electromagnetic field meters, hoping to catch a spike of unexplained energy that might correspond to a spectral presence. They mount night vision and thermal cameras on tripods, training them on church doors and crossroads for long, silent hours, watching for a heat signature that moves with animal intelligence but lacks a solid form. These investigators are not medieval chroniclers, they are documentarians of the anomalous, seeking to capture the uncatchable with technology. Their findings, while often intriguing to believers, remain firmly in the realm of the ambiguous. A fluctuating EMF reading could be a ghost, or it could be a buried power line or a distant radio transmitter. An odd thermal blur on a video might be a mist, an insect, or a trick of the light. The tools are modern, but the evidence they produce is still subject to the age-old problem of interpretation. Simultaneously, a more grounded form of study takes place in university departments. Sociologists and folklorists collect and analyze sighting reports not for proof of a monster but for proof of a pattern. They create databases mapping locations, dates, weather conditions, and witness demographics. They search for correlations, perhaps noticing that sightings cluster near certain geological features or increase during periods of social anxiety. These studies treat the Black Shuck not as a biological entity, but as a social one, a cultural symptom whose appearance tells us more about the community that sees it than about the creature itself. This empirical approach, whether technological or sociological, represents a profound shift. For centuries, the only tools to understand the Shuck were faith, fear, and story. Now we attempt to dissect the legend with sensors and spreadsheets, yet the core of the mystery endures, stubbornly resistant. It slips through the nets of science because it is not a consistent physical phenomenon, and it evades the full grasp of folklore because its witnesses so often believe truly and deeply that what they experienced was real. The investigation itself becomes part of the legend's modern chapter, a testament to our enduring need to solve the unsolvable, to shine a flashlight into a darkness that has swallowed the beams of countless lanterns before. 500 years is a long time for a ghost story to stay frightening. Most tales fade, their monsters becoming quaint or comical, but the Black Shuck remains a chill on the back of the neck, a pair of eyes in the dark that feel unnervingly close. Its endurance is no accident. This legend survives because it is a masterpiece of folkloric engineering, built from layers of human fear so universal they transcend any single era. At its foundation is a simple, brilliant trick, a familiar form made alien. The dog is humanity's oldest companion, a symbol of loyalty and protection. By twisting this trusted shape into a silent, giant predator with hellfire eyes, the legend violates a deep sense of safety. It turns the guardian into a stalker, the friend into a fiend. This creates an immediate, visceral unease that bypasses logic. We are not afraid of a dragon, for we know dragons are not real, but a dog, we know dogs. And this one is wrong. This distorted familiar then becomes the perfect vessel for our oldest and most profound terror, the mystery of death. The Black Shuck is not merely a monster, it is an omen. It gives a face, a form, and a set of behaviors to the unknowable. Death becomes something you can see padding down a lane, its gaze holding a warning you cannot quite decipher. This transforms random, senseless tragedy into a story with a cause. A sudden loss in the community is easier to process if it was preceded by the beast sighting, because even a malevolent intention is less frightening than pure chaos. The legend provides a narrative for the unthinkable, and in doing so offers a strange, cold comfort. Then there is the gift of tangible history, the storm of 1577. Most myths float freely in a vague once upon a time. The Black Shuck is anchored to a specific Sunday in August, to real towns with real churches that still bear the marks. This artifact, this physical evidence, is the legend's keystone. It allows every new generation to point and say, this is not just a story, it happened here. The scorched door at Blithburg is a relic, a proof of concept that bridges the gap between imagination and reality. It invites the question, if the marks are real, what made them? The story rushes in to fill the silence. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the Black Shuck is a shapeshifter of meaning. It is an empty vessel, a dark silhouette waiting to be filled with whatever a society fears most. For the medieval peasant, it was a demon, a punishment for sin sent by an angry god. For the Puritans, it was a propaganda tool, a hellhound scourging a corrupt church. For the rational Victorians, it became a Gothic symbol of hereditary curses and repressed instincts. And for us today, it effortlessly embodies modern anxieties, from the black dog of depression that follows silently, to the existential dread of forces science cannot measure, to the fear that ancient wildness still lurks just beyond the streetlight's glow. The creature does not change, but our interpretation of its silence does. That is the secret to its immortality. The Black Shuck is less a specific monster and more a mirror. We look into its glowing eyes and see our own fears reflected back, dressed in the primal shape of a wolf from the old stories. It asks us, in every generation, what walks beside you in the dark. And as long as we have shadows both outside and within, we will have an answer ready, waiting in the mist with a familiar, terrifying face. That mirror of glowing eyes has reflected our deepest fears for over 5 centuries. From a single, terrifying line in an Anglo-Saxon chronicle to a metaphor for the darkness within, the journey of the Black Shuck is a map of the human mind itself. We have followed its pawprints through pagan myth and Puritan sermon, watched it carve its story into a church door, and seen it reborn in rock songs and role-playing games. This is not merely the biography of a monster. It is an archaeology of dread, layer by layer, revealing how we have used story to explain the unexplainable. The Black Shuck is a theological argument made flesh, a psychological symptom given form, and a piece of community software designed to keep us safe from real-world dangers. It is a fossil of belief, waiting for each generation to give it new life. So the ultimate question may not be whether a giant black dog with burning eyes truly walks the Norfolk coast. The more profound mystery is why that particular image has felt so necessary, so true for so long. Why do we need the Black Shuck to exist? Perhaps because it gives a shape to the shapeless, a warning to the random, and a companion to our loneliness in the dark. It tells us that our fear has a history, and that we are not the first to feel watched by something just beyond the light. Maybe you have a local legend like this where you live, a phantom animal that guards a bridge or haunts a hill. Share its story in the comments below and let us continue mapping this shadowy geography together. If you want more journeys into the heart of medieval mysteries, subscribe for deeper dives. And the next time you find yourself on a lonely path with the mist closing in, listen closely. You might just hear the old stories whispering on the wind and see, for a fleeting second, a pair of lights that do not belong to any car.